Hey YouTubers, this is the Gold Standard User 924 coming at you with Chapter 11 in my Wrestling Reimagining series for WWE 2006. For today's video, I'll be tackling the Smackdown October pay-per-view event, which will be No Mercy. Now this was a pretty average show, to be honest. A couple of good matches here and there, but for the most part it's not a type of pay-per-view where you have to go out and watch this pay-per-view in its entirety. Now, there were some enjoyable matches to factor in. We had the match between The Undertaker and Mr. Kennedy, Matt Hardy versus Gregory Helms, the unannounced match between William Regal taking on a returning Chris Benoit, and the Fatal 4-Way for the world title wasn't bad either. But if you look at the rest of the card, it was just really forgettable at best. I mean, nothing like terrible, but it was just like something where you just aren't going to look back and say, hey, oh my God, remember that match? Remember that Rey versus Chavo Guerrero and that Falls Count Anywhere match? Man, that really blew me away. To be honest, I just never really got that. But yeah, I mean, No Mercy was just kind of a pretty average card and it's just an average pay per view overall. But it's just, I think we could do a little, if not a lot better with what we got. And I think there was just enough talent at the time to really try and pull off this pay per view to be even better than what it actually was. And that's not me trying to come off arrogant when I say it, but I honestly think that there's some room for improvement, especially with the talent that they had. But all things aside, what you need to know going into this event: on SmackDown, a number one contenders match between Batista and Randy Orton takes place. The winner of that match would go on to challenge Booker T for the World Heavyweight title at No Mercy. The match would end in disqualification when the referee notices Randy Orton using a low blow on Batista, causing a DQ, which Batista is announced to be the number one contender. Post-match, Batista would continue to annihilate Randy Orton with multiple spinebusters to the point where Orton is paralyzed and is unable to move. Based on the events that transpired, the announcers would let it be known that Randy Orton will be out of action, meaning that he will miss out No Mercy as a result. So without further ado, we're just going to kick things off with No Mercy with an opening bout. Now, this was a match that they did in the actual No Mercy, and it was actually a match that was thrown in at the last moment. But the only thing I would change here is that this match, instead of being the second to last match to the main event, this would be the match that will, in my universe, open up No Mercy. And the match I'm referring to is William Regal taking on a returning Chris Benoit in an open challenge match. Now, Regal would just basically cut a promo when he comes out to his entrance and basically talking about how he's been left out of the card, that that he's willing to take part in this pay-per-view, that he's interested in looking for a challenge. So Regal offers this sort of open challenge invitational, demanding a wrestler to come out there and wrestle him in a match. Eventually, Chris Benoit's music hits, crowd pops, the announcers put it over. It's like, Chris Benoit's back. We haven't seen him in several months. And just to really use that as a way to kind of kick off the pay-per-view with something really hot, especially since Benoit would be coming back and making an unannounced return. Now, this was actually a really great match, and I actually wanted to keep this on the card, and just how surprisingly brutal this match was. I mean, it was a shoot style sort of match, and they were just really killing it out there with a lot of these rest holds, and even like William Regal even bladed. It was like a traditional standard wrestling match. I mean, it didn't have to involve any weapons or anything of that nature. Chris Benoit ended up going over William Regal with the crippler crossface. So Benoit making his triumphant return with the victory. Now, there's going to be a bit of a promo time post match, which was not something that they actually did, but just something that I kind of did to kind of move along with the show. What will happen is that we would get like a little mini interview, but Josh Matthews would come out to the ring and provide an interview with Chris Benoit. Congratulations on your returning victory. Now the question is, now that you're back, it's like, where are you going to go next? So Benoit just basically tries to cut a pretty short promo. Benoit would just try and just lay a simple point that, when he was out of action, that he was taking some time to think, trying to recover from his wounds. Benoit starts pursuing interest in going after the World Heavyweight Championship. A couple years ago, I was on top of the world. I was the champion. And when I lost that title, it's like there's something that I lost along the way, that more than just a championship belt, but sort of my dignity, my passion. Like there's something that I just can't really describe about it. That when I lost that world title, there was just this sort of drive that I kind of lack. Thinking about some of these problems that I've been going through, even thinking about where I've been in the past few years in my wrestling career. And now that I'm back, I'm interested in going after that world title. I don't care if it's you, Booker T, or Batista, depending on who's going to be the champion walking out No Mercy. So Benoit goes over William Regal, just like how it happened. Now we get is the second match on the card, which will be a tag team match. And Michelle McCool, who was on Smackdown at this time, and she had a tag team which consisted of Casey James and Idol Stevens. One of those two wrestlers would go on to have success as Damian Sandow. So this would mark their pay-per-view debut, and I would actually have them go over the Mexicools. It's not so much build-up per se, but how this kind of stems for a bit is that there would have been a number one contenders match between the FBI taking on the Mexicools. At some point, Michelle McCool and her tag team come out there and cost the Mexicools the match. So this kind of really builds into what we would get here for this pay-per-view. And it would be a pretty short match. I mean, it's not going to get too drawn out, but it's just more of like a TV style match you would see on like SmackDown or Velocity. Michelle McCool and her tag team, which I dubbed them Teacher's Pets, and they're going to go over Super Crazy and Psychosis. Then we have is the third match, which will be also another wrestler, or just basically one wrestler as opposed to just a tag team. But this would be also a debut of Montel Vontavious Porter, aka MVP, who was also making his debut that same time. Now, rather than having MVP in a match against an unknown jobber, I decided to have him make his in-ring debut by taking on a established wrestler in Rey Mysterio. Now, MVP would be debuting the same as he was, sitting in the crowd and basically trying to put himself over. What we would do here is something that I've been kind of brainstorming when I was considering exactly how we get to where we ended up getting to, would be that MVP would start, trash talking Rey Mysterio and how all his fans consist of all these little kids that look up to him. And because Mysterio has this signature mask that he would always wear to the ring, he thinks that Rey Mysterio is a criminal, that he doesn't understand why fans look up to him. It's like he doesn't have the fame and the fortune that I do. I figured just try to give MVP a match against someone that the audience have grown familiar with. especially with Rey Mysterio, since he'd been a staple on SmackDown for the past 4 years. I would have MVP obviously going over Rey Mysterio in his pay-per-view debut and really trying to establish Montel Vontavious Porter, going over a former United States champion and cruiserweight champion. So I think that would be a really huge accomplishment for MVP, especially in his first match in the WWE. Now we get to is the SmackDown Tag Team Championships. The belts are up for grabs. Brian Kendrick, Paul London, the Hooligans, they go up against two members of the FBI. Now, I had discussed just a bit earlier in the video that the FBI would go over the Mexicools with, thanks to interference from Michelle McCool and her tag team. The FBI have been back together as a stable since the summer, Tony Mamaluke making his debut, and under his guidance, that keeping guys like Nunzio, or what he's now known as Little Guido in ECW, and as well as Big Vito, they were both part of a tag team, and there was a bit of a rift for those two wrestlers until Mamaluke served as sort of a mediator to, try and convince Little Guido and Vito to kind of make amends and put their differences aside. So the FBI are back as a faction. They also have Big Guido, who was kind of packaged in the deal where the ECW brand was returning, so they were bringing a lot of wrestlers from the original run of ECW to come back. So he's kind of packaged as part of this newly formed stable. Paul Heyman, who's the general manager for Extreme Championship Wrestling, he's been running that show for about 3 to 4 months, maybe a little more than that. He doesn't necessarily have any other types of divisions outside the World Heavyweight title division, his main event scene, so to speak. Now, Heyman is interested, especially with the FBI, who were under SmackDown contract just prior to the announcement of the revival. Little Guido and Vito have been vying for those tag team title shots for quite some time, and now they're finally getting that opportunity. Now the thing is that Heyman, by having the FBI to win those tag team title belts, he even goes as far as to threaten Teddy Long that he is going to take those set of tag belts over to ECW to start his own division. Teddy Long is just kind of like, oh no, I can't have that. I can't accept that. But after a bit of a convincing, however, we do have a match for the tag team title belts with Kendrick and London. They are willing to take that risk. Now, because the FBI had at least like 2 or 3 members of the group that would be at ringside, but at some point, the likes of Tony Mamaluke, Big Guido, and Trinity, at some point they would be escorted from ringside, as well as Ashley Massaro, who was accompanying Kendrick and London at this point. So all the wrestlers that are pretty much standing at ringside would be escorted eventually. It's like we have to have a clear winner. Kendrick and London managed to walk out of the match, still the SmackDown Tag Team Champions. Now we have is a match that they also did in the actual No Mercy, but I think we could do a little more than just regular one-on-one matches. So because this was in their hometown, this would be Matt Hardy taking on Shane Helms in a hometown street fight of Raleigh, North Carolina. This was a match that I really felt like they could have done a little more than just have a random series of matches with hardly any narrative or story in it. Now, going back to the video where I was discussing about my rebooking of SummerSlam, what happened was that Shannon Moore interfered in that match involving Matt and Shane, and Shannon would cost Matt Hardy the match. So on SmackDown, Shannon Moore would basically cut a promo explaining about his actions, that that he's back. We haven't seen him in many years. Moore even goes on a tirade about his hatred for Matt and all the times that he took advantage on him. He says that he's sick and tired of the treatment he had been given, and by aligning with a close friend like Shane Helms, even going back to their days in WCW, Shannon guarantees that Shane will treat him with the respect he truly deserves. This leads to a match on SmackDown. Matt Hardy would defeat Shannon Moore to get his revenge, but post-match, Shane attacks Matt Hardy from behind with a weapon, which leads to a 2-on-1 assault. Based on the circumstances, Teddy Long would come out there to announce that at No Mercy, there will be a street fight between Matt Hardy and Shane Helms in their hometown of Raleigh, North Carolina. I think by adding like a match stipulation, I think this could really get over. I mean, especially given those two wrestlers, and Matt Hardy's no stranger when it comes to working in these sort of hardcore matches, whether it be steel cage matches or occasions where Matt Hardy would do like a lot of high spots, and the same applies with Shane Helms as well. Two best friends, and I'm sure they could come up with some really cool spots and some moments where it just feels like the crowd's just kind of like in shock and awe. It's like, I can't believe I saw that. And I'm sure they could come up with some really cool ideas as far as how their matches will flow. And I believe by adding a match stipulation, and even with with Shannon Moore, since he actually in reality was already back from the company at this point, but they put him on ECW and he wasn't really being utilized as much other than just being a jobber. Just reunite Shannon Moore and Shane Helms, 3 count minus the boy band gimmick, but the fact that adding someone like Shannon Moore to kind of add a little bit of a layer to their program, and to have some sort of like storyline and a narrative and a reason to explain why this match is happening. Which I just think my minor complaint is I just feel like there was some untapped potential when it's all said and done. So without further ado, I would have Shane Helms go over Matt Hardy in hopefully a pretty brutal street fight. Now we have is the triple threat match, and this would involve the Cruiserweight Championship belt being up for grabs. Jimmy Yang going in as the champion, defending the belt against Chavo Guerrero and Jamie Noble. Now, I was originally going to make this a fatal 4-way with Kid Cash being added in the equation, and this would have involved the Pit Bulls and Chavo and Jimmy Yang to kind of like team up, and this would have been in a way where Jimmy Wang won the Cruiserweight title in his pay-per-view debut or pay-per-view re-debut, depending on how you look at it. But Jimmy Yang would win the Cruiserweight title. And so Chavo's been asking for his rematch, but a lot of the times there's just something that's in the way that's preventing Chavo from getting such an opportunity. The Pit Bulls are kind of an obstacle, just trying to get in their way. Chavo and Jimmy Yang forced to pair up and to try and take out the Pit Bulls. At some point, with Kid Cash, he was just getting ready to be released. And storyline wise, Jamie Noble would turn on Kid Cash. This would have instead be a triple threat. But Jimmy Yang is going to go over and retain the belt against Chavo and Jamie Noble. Not necessarily a very long match because this was, coming off the heels of the street fight between Matt and Shane. Now we get to the United States Championship bout. This would be Bobby Lashley taking on the champion Fit Finlay. Now how this kind of goes into play is that in September, this would have marked Bobby Lashley's 1-year anniversary since making his debut on WWE television. So being the general manager with Teddy Long, he awards Bobby Lashley with a sort of incentive invoking a United States title shot, Fit Finlay would be forced to defend the belt against Lashley. And since that match happens on SmackDown, unfortunately, it ends in sort of like a DQ finish. And so this kind of sets up a rematch here at No Mercy. Now, they did have the little bastard, or Hornswoggle, as we ended up learning his name, but because of the constant involvements of the little bastard, if he even interferes in the match in however way, shape, or form, then Finlay would be forced to be stripped out of that US title. So they have the match here. And, Bobby and Finlay actually had some really good chemistry during this time. It was actually one of the forgotten rivalries of that year. But I actually remember watching uh, some of those matches around that time, and even rewatching it again many years later. And they actually really pulled some pretty solid matches overall. And I didn't want to necessarily push Bobby Lashley as hard as WWE did around that time by shoving him into like the main event scene or anything like that. At least not at this point yet. But I mean, he was a solid wrestler for what he was. I would give Bobby Lashley his moment and defeat Fit Finlay in order to become the new United States champion. So this was the one title change that has happened up to this point. So Bobby Lashley would go over Fit Finlay and win his first championship in the WWE. Next up we have is the first out of the two doubleheader matches presented on the show. And this would consist of The Undertaker taking on Mr. Kennedy. Build up the exact same way that you did. Mr. Kennedy would be tearing through the competition, even going as far as racking up some major victories over some top tier talent, namely the likes of guys like Dave Batista and Randy Orton. Since Batista and Orton are in the middle of a program, they would interfere in each other's matches, allowing Mr. Kennedy to rack up a major win over those two former World Heavyweight Champions. Kennedy would spend the next several weeks just cutting these sort of promos, just bragging about how he managed to do the unthinkable, accomplishing something that not many superstars in the locker room could ever claim. So Kennedy feels that there's just not enough competition on SmackDown, even going as far as pursuing interest in leaving SmackDown in order to go to Monday Night Raw. But then all of a sudden the lights fade out, the arena's dim, we hear a familiar gong sound that echoes throughout the arena. Out comes The Undertaker, he confronts Mr. Kennedy, bam, that's how we set up that feud. They basically did a really good job just having Kennedy getting put over, cutting these sort of promos, and so I wouldn't necessarily elaborate too much. It's basically the same thing that they did, and the match is going to end disqualification. So what would happen afterwards is that because I had The Miz as Kennedy's friend and manager, even in this universe. So after the post-match disqualification, Mr. Kennedy and Undertaker would continue to brawl for a bit. The Miz would find a way to interfere in the match. One scenario would be Kennedy would use The Miz as a sacrificial lamb. He would shove The Miz next to The Undertaker as Kennedy just flees out of the ring immediately. Taker turns around. The Miz is just afraid, like he's frozen solid. He doesn't know what to do. He just feels very intimidated based on The Undertaker's facial expression. Undertaker lays out The Miz, choke slam, tombstone pile driver. Kennedy's just standing at the aisle, just like very intimidated as well. Undertaker just looking towards Kennedy and giving him that sort of menacing stare. So this feud is definitely going to continue, and I definitely really like the idea of Kennedy just going over some big time wrestlers, and WWE was very high on Kennedy, and it seemed like they were planning some really big things for him. Now, in hindsight, things didn't go out the way they did, but at the time, Kennedy did really have a lot of potential and cut some really solid and at times some really awesome promos. And he really carried himself, especially in the build-up leading into the show. And the match wasn't that bad either. Now we have is the main event, and this particular main event might not be something that many fans would be very keen of, especially looking at some of the series of matches that they had in the actual WWE in 2006. But I'm actually doing it here, and this is for the World Heavyweight Championship. Booker T going in as the champion, defending the belt against Batista. As far as Batista and Orton's program is concerned, Batista took out Randy Orton and kayfabe injuring him by damaging his spine after delivering multiple Batista Spinebusters to the point where Orton just is immobile. He would be stretchered out of the arena and be taken off TV for a little bit. Batista's the #1 contender to challenge Booker T for the World Heavyweight title. Booker T is going to go over in this match. He's going to retain the title belt, but under some typical shenanigans that will happen along the way. We have guys like Finlay coming out there, guys like William Regal, and Batista's doing all he can to fend them all off. And then Batista does get caught off guard, since Sharmell is accompanying Booker T during this time, so even she's, trying to make use of this time to kind of distract Batista, but Batista's not having it. Randy Orton just coming out from the crowd. The announcers were like, what the hell? What's Randy Orton doing here? He's not scheduled to be on this show. And so Orton comes out, interferes in the match, and just pummels Batista while the referee's distracted and lays Batista out with the RKO. Booker T wouldn't have any idea that all this carnage is taking place. Booker T just picks up Batista, nails the final blow with the scissors kick. 1, 2, 3. Booker T walks out of the match, still your World Heavyweight Champion. And Batista's just furious that, that things just didn't go his way, that Batista just came so close to regaining the World Heavyweight Championship that he never lost. With Orton just being kind of like a thorn in Batista's eye, this kind of really sets his rivalry with Randy Orton to an all-time high. So that's basically the ending of No Mercy there. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Tell me what your thoughts are regarding this particular card that I structured for No Mercy. I would gladly appreciate your feedback. Stay tuned as I will book the Raw November pay-per-view event. There were actually 2 November pay-per-view events, and this pay-per-view event that preceded No Mercy happens to be Cyber Sunday. Thank you all guys for watching, and until then, this is the Gold Standard 0924 signing out.